How do we think about the person whose views are not only different from your own, they are antithetical to your own? What you stand for, they stand for the exact opposite. And you're here and they're here, and you're not changing and they're not changing, and yet we share a planet, we share a country, we share a community, sometimes we even share a family. How do we think about the other person who is on the exact opposite side of a super contentious issue in a super contentious time? For example, how do we think about Novak Djokovic? Now, Novak Djokovic is indisputably one of the greatest tennis players in the history of the sport. Djokovic has won 20 Grand Slam titles. That is second most of all time. Only Rafael Nadal has won more. He's won 21. And in fact, Djokovic won the French Open last year. And the French Open, as you know, is open now. And if Djokovic wins this year, he will have tied Rafael Nadal. Djokovic has been listed as the greatest tennis player in the world for a record 370 weeks. And yet, here's the rub. There was an ESPN Sports Daily podcast with the evocative title, "Will Novak Djokovic ever be beloved?" And this podcast points out that the other tennis greats are beloved. People love Roger Federer. People love Rafael Nadal. People do not love Novak Djokovic. And the podcast asked the question, why is that? So it turns out that Djokovic was not beloved even before the pandemic. But that problem has gotten exacerbated since the pandemic. Many of us might have followed all the drama that swirled around the Australian Open. For example, the fact that Djokovic was not honest in his application with the Australian authorities for a visa. For example, they asked the question, have you been anywhere but home and Australia in the last 14 days? Have you been anywhere? Answer, no. But it turned out that the answer was yes. He had been to Spain. Oops, I forgot the whole Spain trip. And then he explained that he made a mistake. Then there was the time that he gave an interview and did a photo shoot with a French journalist. He was COVID positive, and he was unmasked, and he didn't tell the journalist. And turns out that Australia kicked him out of the country for being unvaccinated. Now, this podcast points out that many people who love tennis and would otherwise appreciate his sterling tennis game put him in a box as the anti-vaxxer. Djokovic, the anti-vaxxer. And since the stakes are so high, since COVID has caused so much illness and suffering and death, many people have no use for a prominent athlete who refuses to get vaccinated and whose refusal might motivate other people to refuse to get vaccinated, thereby increasing the amount of illness and suffering and death. I myself felt that way. When I thought about Djokovic, I thought about a very effective and expressive and short diss that I learned from my late sainted grandmother, my booby, Sarah Garden Swartz. I just love this diss. Maybe you grew up with this. Feh. That's F-E-H double exclamation mark. Feh. Feh on Djokovic. Feh on Djokovic, the anti-vaxxer. I hope he never wins another tennis game. That's where I was until I heard the ESPN Daily Podcast. And the ESPN Daily Podcast challenged my thinking. And I want to ask you if it challenges your thinking. Because the ESPN Daily Podcast made me think about two thinkers, one a Jewish source of wisdom, one an American source of wisdom, that when paired together bring out the best in one another, kind of like an excellent wine and cheese pairing. Each brings out the best in the other. The Jewish source of wisdom is from Pirkei Avot. And it's a teaching from Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia, who tells us, Heve dan et kol ha'adam l'chaf zechut. Judge every person in the light most favorable. Give everybody a break. Cut everybody some slack. Now, I had always thought that the most important part of that teaching, where that teaching hit the road, the rubber hit the road, was l'chaf zechut, charitable, give everybody a break, cut some people slack. But reading it now in this contentious time, it's clear that the really hard part of that teaching is the word kol. Everybody, kol ha'adam. Heve dan et kol ha'adam l'chaf zechut. Judge everybody in the light most favorable. Michelle just so poignantly and passionately talked about Uvalde, Texas. Here's a question for you. Take a look at the NRA convention in Houston, which is happening now. And yesterday, there are these photographs of Americans who are proud and defiant NRA members who go to the NRA convention in Texas the week of Uvalde, Texas. And over here are protesters. And let's just say there's not a lot of love between them. And there are a lot of gestures that they show each other that I can't really describe on the bima. And I'm thinking about Yehoshua ben Prachia's teaching. Heve dan et kol ha'adam l'chaf zechut. There's actually a fence that separates them. Now, it is easy to judge the people on your side of the divide in the light most favorable, but how do you judge the person on the other side of the divide when you hate the substance of their position? How do you judge them in the light most favorable? And that leads us to the second source of wisdom, which is from Brené Brown, American source of wisdom. She's the most popular TED Talk teacher. Brené Brown says something that is just so helpful and thoughtful. I just love this, and I think about this like every day. She says that everybody, kol ha'adam, she doesn't say kol ha'adam, but that's what she's saying. Everybody is walking around with some crisis, some trial, some ordeal, some pain, some brokenness, some nightmare that they are having, that the rest of the world knows nothing about. Everybody presents a facade. You're put together. Everybody has this facade. How are you? I'm great. How are you? I'm terrific. How are you? I'm fabulous. How are you? Excellent. How are you? Great. But beneath the facade, there's a brokenness that nobody knows anything about that totally shapes that person. Now, when you put these two together, Yehoshua ben Prachia, judge everybody in the light most favorable, even the people on the other side of the fence. And Brené Brown, everybody's carrying around a nightmare that you know nothing about. It would seem that the way that you can judge other people more favorably is to be interested in their nightmare, is to be curious about what is it, what brokenness, what trauma, what pain are they carrying around that is making them who they are. And that brings us to the ESPN Daily Podcast about Djokovic that changed my thinking or challenged my thinking from fair double exclamation mark. The ESPN Daily Podcast brought out two facts about Djokovic that I had no idea. The first had to do with his physical health. Djokovic's tennis career is divided into two totally different halves. There's the Djokovic early career in his late teens up until the age of 23, and then Djokovic from 23 to today. So in the first part of his tennis career, always the same pattern. Brilliant, shows so much promise. Oh my God, sparkling. Oh my God, this guy's a tennis prodigy. Oh my God. But he never won the big one, and he never won a Grand Slam because he always had illness issues and weakness issues and sickness issues. And you would be seeing him play, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the match, illness, weakness, collapse. One day, he's playing on Serbian national TV, and the same pattern, brilliant, and then collapse. And there's a Serbian doctor watching the match, not because he's a tennis fan, but his wife is a big tennis fan. And they're watching this brilliant young player, this prodigy, who just collapses mid-match. And the TV announcer says, oh, he must be having another asthma attack. And this doctor says, it's not asthma, they're misdiagnosing. And the wife says, he's Serbian, you're Serbian, reach out to him, help him. So the Serbian doctor reaches out to Serbian Djokovic and says, let me take you to lunch. I can heal you. And the tennis player and the doctor go out for lunch, and the doctor says, you don't have asthma. You've got something else, and I think I can cure you. I'm going to show you right now. Let me run an experiment. Give me your hand. Djokovic gives him his hand. And the doctor says, I'm going to try to press down on the hand. Can you resist my hand? And Djokovic can resist his hand. No issue whatsoever. And then the doctor says, hey, take this slice of bread. Don't eat it. Just put it near your stomach, and let's repeat the experiment. And now, slice of bread here, hand here. The doctor pushes down, and Djokovic is utterly unable to resist, demonstrably weaker. And the doctor says to him, you don't have asthma. You have a gluten allergy. If you go gluten-free, you will feel much better really quickly. And Djokovic goes gluten-free, and he feels dramatically better. And then he goes strictly vegan, and he feels dramatically better. And so here's the deal. During the tennis career where he ate meat and bread, he won 0 Grand Slam titles. During the tennis career when he ate no meat and no gluten, he won 20 Grand Slam titles. And what he takes away from this is Western medicine ain't all that it's cracked up to be. He saw 100 doctors from the Western medicine department, and he didn't feel good. He cuts out bread and meat, and he feels great. Maybe Western medicine is not all that it's cracked up to be. I don't say this to justify his position. His position is not justifiable, but to try to understand his position. And then here's the second story. Djokovic is 12 years old in 1999. 12. And in 1999, the Kosovo War happens, and NATO bombs Serbia. And he's 12 years old, and from March to June, March 24th to June 10th of 1999, there's relentless bombing attack on Serbia. And this ESPN reporter goes with Djokovic to the home of his youth, to the bunker, the underground bunker where the family would have to stay during the campaigns. And it's quite dramatic. The reporter is there with Djokovic in real time. We're opening the door to the bunker. We're going downstairs to the bunker. And this reporter reports, it's really dark. It's really smelly. It's really gross. And there's a stationary bike. And Djokovic points out that there's a stationary bike, and he has vivid memories that the place was completely dark, except for if somebody would pedal on the stationary bike, that would generate just enough electricity to light the place a little bit while somebody was biking on the stationary bike. And the bike was still there. And then Djokovic tells the reporter the following memory. When I was 12 years old, I loved tennis. I had a dedicated tennis coach. When the bombing campaign was over, my coach and I would go to the area that had just been bombed with rackets and balls. and I'd play tennis over the craters, and I'd play tennis amidst the ruins. Why there? Because if they just bombed there, it would be unlikely they would bomb there again. I played all my tennis from March to June of 1999 on bomb sites. Now, Djokovic was 12. He didn't know from geopolitics. He didn't know from Milosevic. He didn't know why. All he knew is that the West had bombed his home and family. Now, roll the film forward. There's a dreadful once-in-100 years global pandemic, and Western medicine comes up with a great, miraculous, life-saving vaccine. But Western medicine missed his food diagnosis, and the West bombed him, and he's not so aye-aye about West or Western medicine. Now, saying this in no way justifies not getting vaccinated. He is wrong not to get vaccinated. But it does just this. And here's what I want to ask you when you think about the other people on the other side of the divide. It does mean that he's not a bad person for not getting vaccinated. And can you hate the position, reject the position, without thinking that the person who holds that position is a bad person? That's the work we got to do. Can we not hate the person who holds the position that we hate? Because right now, if you look at that picture from Houston, there's just a lot of hate. But if we can reject the position, hate the position, not hate the person who holds it, because we realize that the person who holds it comes from somewhere and has some background and was in a bunker and has their story. They're a human with a different story. Don't have to hate them. What does that mean? That means that when you say fair, exclamation mark, that ends the conversation. When you say fair, that ends the relationship. When you say, tell me more, that opens up the possibility of understanding. And that is a result that we could all cheer for. Shabbat Shalom.